Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guest is Scott Reddy. Scott has served the education industry for more than 20 years and has worked for more than 35 years in accessibility. Scott's first language is American Sign Language, and he has been part of the deaf community through his parents, who were former teachers at the Missouri School for the Deaf. All right, well, hi, Scott. Thanks so much for being our guest today. We're so pleased to have you.
Well, hi, Emily. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So some of our listeners might not be familiar with you and your background. Love to hear what you can tell us about that.
Absolutely. Glad to do so. I currently am a director of customer success at a company called Verbit. We provide captioning, transcription, and audio description to various markets, have it be education, media, government, corporate, and help to oversee the educational vertical. A little bit about my personal life. I have been in the field of accessibility for over 35 years and in the field of education for close to 30 now in various roles. All of my roles have always focused on creating access for individuals in various stages of their life. My parents were both deaf. They were both instructors at the School for the Deaf in Missouri. So I had an awesome privilege of growing up on campus and experiencing the culture and the language firsthand.
That's wonderful. And I'd love to hear, maybe a little bit more about that upbringing and that world and how it's connected you to the disability community as a child of deaf adults, right? Or Coda, if people aren't familiar with that term, and really how that impacts your daily life and how that's informed your work.
Great question, Emily. And it has impacted me to the core of who I am. So having had the opportunity to grow up in the community and experience the community as a Coda really provided me a cultural understanding of what the community goes through and experiences. Oftentimes, and I'll use an individual that's deaf as an example, oftentimes the general population will look and go, oh, the person's not able to hear. But so much of the time, it's not about not being able to hear, it's the communication is broken. There's not a way to connect. There are things that are communicated that are not communicated in a way so that everybody can understand what's being communicated. So it's not so much that the person isn't able to hear, it's what takes place around the situation of not being able to hear. One small example, and the example that I used was an external example of communication, but there's also internal examples that individuals from the community have shared with me where there's a suspicion that hearing people know more than deaf people. And you might think, well, why would that be? Well, think about how many conversations we overhear on a day-to-day basis. And we hear how individuals are managing the situations in those conversations. Even if it's not a situation that we're directly involved in, we still have that ability to hear from others as to how they're managing their day-to-day responsibilities. A deaf person feels like they're isolated from that ambient knowledge, the discussions that take place. And so oftentimes there's an internal struggle feeling like, well, a deaf person must not know as much as a hearing person because a hearing person has the ability to hear all of those additional conversations. And oftentimes it's not true. And yes, we might be able to hear a lot of conversations, but we all know how much noise takes place around us, and it's irrelevant to our day-to-day lives. So that's just a little bit of the feelings and the processes that take place. Now, taking that and applying it to my day-to-day job, when I'm in the company and I am promoting and designing and developing captioning, for example, or other services that we provide, I'm able to bring that perspective into how we approach the community, how we design and how we develop and deliver our services in order to not just meet the external, but also to provide that internal. An example of that is in captioning, being able to provide the indicators of other sounds that might be involved in the media content. While as a hearing person, we might not think that's important, to an individual who might be deaf or hard of hearing, knowing that the dog is barking can be very critical in understanding what's taking place within that media content, or that there's a knock at the door.
Well, speaking of media content, this interview is very timely because the movie Coda just won Best Picture at the Oscars. So I wondered, as a Coda yourself, did you see the movie? And if so, what did you think? What does it mean to you to see that experience represented in major media?
Oh, I saw the movie the moment it came out, and I was so thrilled that there was an excellent representation of a life within a family where the parents are deaf, and that the child is a Coda, a hearing child of deaf adults, and the balancing act that the child goes through between two different cultures, two different languages, and the values that are different among those two cultures. For example, the music. The daughter became very involved in music, and oftentimes the parents in the movie didn't understand the value of music. It's not something that is treasured within the culture oftentimes. And just showing that contrast there in the movie was a glimpse into not just that the ears don't work, but the more cultural, intrinsic values that are part of the two worlds. And as you mentioned, at the Oscars, they won awards. I'm also very excited that our company was able to provide the captioning for both of those. So we did provide the captioning for both the SAG Awards as well as the Oscars. So it was a personal excitement, but also a professional excitement that we got to be a part of bridging the communication in that way also.
That's wonderful. And that leads really nicely into my next question, which is, which aspects of your career do you find to be most rewarding?
In my career, I've always had an intrinsic motivator. As with any job, there's always going to be aspects of that job that you have to do in order to accomplish the goals. Sometimes those aspects are not as fun, but that intrinsic motivation that I have is to build a communication bridge to enable individuals that would not have access to now be able to have that access. I grew up prior to captioning being on TV. I had to sit next to the TV and interpret the news in order for my parents to be able to understand Vietnam War. To now be able to say that I am making an impact, especially in education, where students are able to go into a classroom and have an equitable experience by being able to access media content like any other student, that is mind-blowing compared to when I was in school and going through my undergrad and my graduate programs. And we have so much more to achieve. We're not even close to achieving where we're going yet. How captioning is not only being provided for the deaf and hard of hearing, but almost all of us turn captioning on our TV. Emily, I'm curious, do you ever watch captioning?
Oh, all the time. I do have some hearing loss, so I rely on that.
Okay. 95% of the individuals I talk to on a day-to-day basis, on a regular basis, turn captioning on their TV or in social media. If you look at social media, the little video snippets, if it's captioned, because most of the time we watch social media silently, we don't turn on the volume for our social media. So if those little video snippets aren't captioned, we typically will just scan right on by them. We'll just scroll by those and ignore those. But if it's captioned, they'll capture our attention and we'll engage with that media content. Again, that's for all individuals, not just individuals that are deaf or hard of hearing. So much like the curb cut or the ramp that was installed, we all have come to realize that those are not used only by individuals who use a wheelchair, but we all use those. And those were introduced as an accommodation. The same thing's true with captioning. So when I say that there's still a significant opportunity for us all to further and engage with content with captioning.
And from your perspective, how have assistive technologies evolved to better meet the needs of people living with disabilities?
I love that question, Emily. As a child growing up, it was not possible to call you and say, hey, Emily, are you going to be home this afternoon? Great, I'm going to come on by and stop and see you. Because there wasn't ability to call. We didn't have relay centers. We didn't have communication devices that we could just call each other. As a common practice, people would just show up at your doorstep because there was no way to contact you. Interesting little tidbit, outside of most deaf individuals' homes, they would have a pad of paper and a pencil. That's because if somebody came to their house and they weren't home, they provided them a pad of paper and pencil to leave a note. Think about that. And I'm not that old, but that's how some of the technologies have advanced and developed to create that connectivity among all individuals. So have it be via the telephone, have it be in engaging with media, have it be the ability to have greater mobility around. When we look at technology, for example, like Siri, that can turn on my lights, increase my volume. You're talking about accessibility now that technology is enabling that is way beyond anything that we could have imagined 20, 30 years ago. And then when we get into autonomous driving, can you fathom an individual being blind, but yet still being able to drive? Again, is something that less than 10 or 15 years ago, we would have thought that would never happen.
Yeah, those are really good points about the evolution of assistive technologies. So, we've mentioned it a little bit up till now, but please do tell us a little bit more about Verbit, who it assists and kind of where it's useful.
Absolutely. So as I've shared, the flagship product that we have is providing captioning services. We are able to enable captioning within, and I'm just going to use education as an example here. Students are able to engage with media. Now, back in the day when captioning started on TV, oftentimes you would hear captioning provided by so-and-so company for the deaf and hard of hearing. Well, they quickly realized it's not just for the deaf and hard of hearing, it's for everybody. So they have removed that from the announcement. And now they don't even announce it like that anymore because it's just part of the normal environment that is provided. So in the educational setting, captioning no longer is just providing access to the content, but how is captioning now becoming part of a learning feature? So we think about 50-minute lecture. After class, do you want to go back and have to try and watch that 50-minute lecture again? Or do you want to be able to focus in on just that photosynthesis discussion that took place in your science course? So now, by having it captioned, you're able to search and you can pick out specific words. Let's take it to the next level. We also have artificial intelligence and we have automated speech recognition that is coupled in with our technology. How does artificial intelligence now, how are we able to utilize that to advance learning with the captioning or transcript that we were able to capture? We're studying for our midterm. How can artificial intelligence now say, we've discussed photosynthesis over the last 8 weeks. Let me bring this all together in a synopsis for you so that, Emily, you don't have to go over the last 8 weeks of all of your notes and try and understand everything that was said about photosynthesis. Now we're taking captioning to a whole new level. And that's exactly where Verbit's going.
And would you say that that extra step is kind of what sets you apart from other services that are out there?
Exactly. We have a whole team of individuals that are on our research and development. We have a speech recognition team. We have so many scientists and developers that are constantly looking at where can we go in the next 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years. They're studying all the latest research that's out there in order for us to be able to provide to our clients not just captioning that connects them with the media, but rather provide them features that are going to enhance their learning opportunities.
And what do you hope for the future of accessibility and for the ADA?
I love that question, Emily, because when we start talking about access and we talk about inclusivity, as the ramp is no longer looked at as an accommodation, it's just part of our environment. The elevator is not looked at as part of an accommodation, it's just part of our environment. I look forward to the day when we can say we have achieved inclusivity because wherever we go, no longer is accessibility having to be identified and disability having to be identified and accessibility having to be provided in a one-off type situation. Will we ever be 100% accessible? Absolutely not. There's always going to be those unique situations. I am so looking forward to the day, and I don't believe it's far away, where individuals will be able to have an inclusive experience wherever they go, because we have been able to build that in to our day-to-day lives.
That's a beautiful hope. So as we wrap up here today, what would you say your final words are for our listeners? Where can listeners connect with you after today's episode?
Final words would be to look at how we can create a greater access for all individuals. Rather than looking at an individual and identifying the disability, how can we look at the abilities and create greater access and greater connection? There are going to be scenarios that we're not going to know how to create those access points. But you know what? Every individual knows. So ask. If an individual has a varying ability and you're not sure how to make that connection, ask them. They've definitely dealt with it prior to your asking the question. You're not going to be the first person to ask that question. And they appreciate the fact that you are wanting to make the connection. The best way to get in touch with me is to go to our website at verbit.ai. And on our website, there's a contact us page, and they can contact us, and that information will be brought in, and we will be able to answer questions, be able to help provide support. We have a lot of educational institutions as well as companies within your region that we currently serve, and we would love to be able to further that service with anybody that's listening to this podcast and be able to create that inclusivity there.
Well, very wise final last words from you, Scott, and we will be sure to put those links and contact information in the show notes for our listeners. So thanks again for being our guest today.
Emily, always glad to, and I wish you the best. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. Grant number 90DPAD0009-01-00. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.